Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to 2022. And I'm just going to say, I hope you had a nice sort of restful break. I'm actually going to make today really quick. For those of you who might have seen me in the webinar a couple of weeks ago, we did actually kick off with some interesting stuff looking at change management this year. And I think it's a really good time to talk about change management when we come back into 2022. So if there's anybody that has any questions that you would like to put to me while we're doing this broadcast, please just put them in the comments. And also, if you want to put in the comments whether you're watching live and where you're watching from, or if you come back to this later and see it as a recording, please just put in the bottom that you watched it as a recording or a follow-up. If you do have any questions, even once we're no longer live, please just make them in the comments, because we can go back and come to answering those for you at some point in the future. And especially if you've got any ideas or particular points that you think you'd like to have answered in these live sessions on a Wednesday at lunchtime. I did say I was going to make this one a short one today. Unfortunately for me, the dog is sick, and the only time I could get him into the vet was, in about 20 minutes. So let me get on with it. I wanted to talk to you today about what we need to do if we're finding that our staff aren't really present or effective. Now, I kind of set this topic in relation to change management specifically, but what we have noticed, and a lot of people have talked about this over COVID and how COVID's impacted the work environment in varying ways, that at varying points in time, they just sort of find people, not really being engaged or effectively kind of connected in with what it is that we're trying to achieve. Now, in a change management perspective, there's a specific kind of point that you want to get on top of whether or not they're not engaged in the change process that you're trying to get. So in other words, you haven't actually got their buy-in. Or just in a general sort of sense, there's some other kind of questions that really need to be asked about whether or not they're not engaged because there's actually a personal issue that they're trying to deal with, and that's why they're not kind of bringing their 100% game to the work environment. And so there's a couple of things that I would suggest around that. So if you've just decided that you're going to put in a new change process, I just want to park that to one side for a second, and let's just talk about the first thing we need to do. Is if we just notice in general that people aren't engaging in the work environment, they're not being effective in what they're actually delivering, is just taking that moment to have a little bit of an informal catch up with them and asking the question about what's going on. Now, I always say to people, open questions get open answers. If we ask closed questions, then we get closed answers. So one of the things that we do when we kind of notice people aren't really engaging is we'll sort of turn around and go, "Oh, everything okay?" And they'll say, "Yep," even though you know that it's not really okay and they're not actually engaging. So you don't want to kind of just open a question, like leave it, because even though it seems like is everything okay is it's an open question, they could answer it more fully. Most people, if they don't want to get into a big personal discussion, especially if you ask them in front of other work colleagues, they're just going to say, "Yep, everything's fine." If you notice that what they're telling you is actually different to either their work output or how they're behaving in the work environment, then you need to kind of go to the next kind of level. So I want you to think about it in terms of, you've got your amber light rather than green light, everything's going okay. There's an amber light point where you want to kind of take them aside. Now, it's best, honestly, if you want to get to the bottom of the situation, don't make it that you call them into your office and ask them what's going on, because it just sets them in this really formal negative environment and they feel like they're getting into trouble. If you really want to know what's going on and try and get to the bottom of why they're not engaging, then try and take them into a more informal environment. So, whether that's going out for coffee or, catching up for a walk. If you're operating in a virtual kind of situation, then, try and set up a informal kind of lunch chat or something that means that it's not a being called into the boss's office to work out what's wrong with you, because that is just going to put them on guard from the get-go. So you want to get to the bottom of what the issue is, because as human beings, we have a natural tendency to take responsibility for other people's actions. And you know what I mean by this? It's a certain personality types, like, with your partner, where sometimes it's kind of like they seem cranky and put out. And often we assume that they must be cranky with us. They could be cranky with something completely different. They might have had somebody cut them off while they were driving back from the supermarket or something. But, we take responsibility. So we don't want to ask what's wrong, or we might ask, but, and they say nothing or it's not you. And we don't kind of believe them. And it's just a natural part of being human that we often take on responsibility for other people's, what we're perceiving other people being, how they're behaving. So in a work environment, it is no different. And if you get called into the boss's office, oh, can we have a chat, or I want to make a meeting time with you, or whatever, they often are guarded about what it is, especially because if they're not engaging or they're not being effective, trust me, they know that they're not engaging and they're not being very effective. They might actually come at you with a defensive kind of attitude about it, but it's still underneath it all. That's because they kind of know that they haven't really necessarily been doing the right thing. So when we've got trust in a person to be delivering for us, one of the things that we need to try and do is create an informal way of being able to get to the bottom of, where the problem really is, because we often make assumptions, and it's the worst thing about being human is that we make assumptions. And you know what they say about to assume something, it makes an ass out of you and me, right? So don't assume, don't think that we know what they're not happy about. You might have just announced a change program and this person seems like they're not really on board. Don't assume it's because they don't want to get involved in your change idea. We need to check first. Is it personal or is it work related? If it's work related, is it actually what we think it is, or is it something else? And the worst thing that we can do as leaders is we'll go into a meeting like that and we kind of go, so I noticed that you haven't actually been, involved in my great idea of a change program over here, and what's your problem? That not going to get you anywhere. Sorry, but if you can kind of go, I just noticed that you haven't really sort of been engaged in the same way, or since we've been back from holidays, I kind of noticed that, you don't seem to be as engaged, or, you don't seem to be as interested in what it is that we're doing, can what's going on for you, sort of stuff. It's opening a conversation that is not trying to assume something, but you kind of just making an observation. And they might kind of immediately go, oh, no, sorry, no, I'm fine. And it's kind of like, so then you need to have in the backup the things that you've kind of observed. Now, don't kind of hammer them with it as if, oh, but you didn't do this and you didn't do that. I mean, that's really not going to get you anywhere. It's really more of just an observation. Oh, okay, because I just noticed that you've been late to a couple of meetings and it just opens them up to kind of go, oh, yeah, sorry, I've been a bit distracted, or it might be that the dog's sick in the vet and you're really worried about, might be the kids are sick, or who knows, right? Lots of stuff with COVID where people are doing stuff. We're trying to manage things. We we should never assume that the problem that we've got with engaging them and making them an effective part of any process that we're doing is because they don't want to buy into the process. However, if it is actually that it comes about that you've announced a change program and they are not engaging in it because you haven't actually got them to buy in, then that is a different issue. And in terms of buy in, I've actually talked about how you create buy in when we did the webinar a couple of weeks ago. So, and there's a couple of other short training videos that I've talked about how to create buy in with your people. But in the first instance, don't assume that because you've announced something in the work environment that the reason that they're disengaged is because they don't agree with it. It may not be resistance. It may be completely unrelated, might have something to do with their personal stuff. So I hope that that gave you some insight. I hope that you're able to actually get on with 2022 and get people engaged and buying into all of the change things that you want to try and put in place this year. And if there's anything at all that you think you'd like to kind of get some insight about on these Wednesday live sessions, please just put a comment underneath in the comments below, and we'll come back to them in the future. All right. Have a great Wednesday. See you soon.